I call this meeting in order and welcome to the July 11th Informational. We have a number of things on our agenda today, and the first one is a report from Councillor Rolfing regarding the Audit Committee that met on the 29th.
I was checking with Councillor Ertz and had her phone on, but I'll have to give that up.
Only works for you.
Someday I will catch you. Anyway, yes, the Audit Committee met on Thursday, June 29th. We had a number of different things that transpired. First of all, we recognized Jason Forbes for his years of service on the committee and thanked him for being a stalwart member there. And we introduced our new committee member, who is Dean Buchtenberg, former one of the people who did the audit on Sioux Falls. He retired about a year and a half ago, and so we feel very fortunate to have somebody with that kind of inside knowledge of the situation to be on the board. And we introduced our new internal auditor. So we're at full staff now. Her name is Abby Vandalanati. I always have a hard time with that one. Then we moved into some reports. First audit was that was completed, and the report given was on the by I. Bailey on the entire audit of the City of Sioux Falls. Let me just read a little bit here from this. The financial statement audit resulted in a clean, unmodified opinion, no required audit adjustments, no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, internal control findings, and the finding that the year-end estimates are soundly made by management. The federal audit was also clean and unmodified. And so the City of Sioux Falls looks like we're doing a good job accounting, and we're not missing anything along the way. Then we moved on to the audit report of the cash handling for the Sioux Falls Area Humane Society. Ashley Vandenberg did that audit. The results of that audit focused on 3 areas: policies and procedures, cash handling, and management oversight, which resulted in 6 recommendations, which they have already implemented. Then we talked about the ambulance service. Again, Ashley had done that in that audit. The results of the audit focused on 2 areas only: response time compliance and mutual aid. It was found that the city had various procedures in place to determine if Paramedics Plus is in compliance with response time requirements of the contract, and that there are proper mutual aid procedures in place, and that Paramedics Plus meets the requirements of their contract in all ways. That was the meeting.
Thank you very much. And our next item, Fiscal Committee, Councillor Erpenbach is not here at this point in time, so we'll just go ahead and move on with our presentations, and we will just move that particular part of the agenda
Open discussion.
To later on. We'll have open discussion at this point in time. Any open discussion? No open discussion, so we will move on to our presentations then. The first presentation is zoos and AZA accreditation process, and I welcome Elizabeth Wheely. And
no animals, but we'll be back with animals. We'd love that. It's my pleasure to be here with you today, City Council members. I'm Elizabeth Whaley. I'm the President and CEO of the Great Plains Zoo and Delbridge Museum of Natural History. And today I have with me Kristen Veers, who is one of the top executives of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. As Principal Executive Vice President, Chris is part of the executive team that manages the association, which accredits and represents 231 zoological institutions in the U.S. and 8 countries. With more than 30 years of experience, Chris has played a key role in the growth and modernization not only of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, but of the whole profession of zoology. We are very pleased to have her here. She has led the development of professional development, accreditation, and animal management programs through the AZA, and she also serves as the principal ambassador for AZA, representing the association before various international treaties. Chris is a trusted advisor to zoo and aquarium professionals around the globe, and we really are so pleased to have her here with us at the Great Plains Zoo and here in Sioux Falls, and to share some information with you. Thank you for the invitation. Chris Veers.
Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I am Chris Veers of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to attend this meeting and share updates about your Great Plains Zoo, as well as perspective on their role in both regional and global conservation efforts. The Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or AZA, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of zoos and aquariums in the areas of conservation, education, science, and recreation. The last 2 days, I've had the opportunity to spend time at your zoo. Not my first time. I was here about 6 years ago. As you know, your zoo was recently accredited by the AZA, and that means it meets standards of excellence in animal care, conservation education, and field conservation. Fewer than 10% of the animal exhibitors licensed by the United States Department of Agriculture are AZA accredited. The Great Plains Zoo, I hope, is a source of great pride for you all and for your community. I believe it provides outstanding care for its animals and great educational opportunities for guests, while also constantly working on the conservation of our natural world. AZA's top priority is animal care. We're dedicated to maintaining standards of excellence in all aspects of animal care and management. We expect that our accreditation standards will be met 365 days a year, 24/7, and our standards are always evolving and changing and continuously being raised. Each zoo must go through the process of accreditation every 5 years and must continue to maintain the changes. We don't give a zoo any special points for having been accredited before. And it's important to note that accreditation is not a slam dunk. It's not a seal that we just give out. We deny accreditation to zoos and aquariums. In a 10-year period, we denied accreditation to some 26 zoos and aquariums. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today to announce that the Great Plains Zoo was recently awarded accreditation through 2021, and I want to extend my congratulations to everyone involved. Your zoo cares for more than 1,000 animals, participates in 24 endangered species breeding programs, is involved in a wide variety of veterinary and research programs, and cares for around 137 species of animals. You're a mid-sized zoo. Your zoo's a mid-sized zoo. It matches your community. I always say a zoo should be right-sized for a community, and I think your zoo is. And yet you have some amazing animals in the zoo's collection, including snow monkeys, Amur tigers, black rhinos, and reticulated giraffes. The Great Plains Zoo has met mandatory, rigorous professional standards for all the standards listed on the slide. Animal care, including living environments and daily enrichment. Veterinary programs, including preventative medicine. We believe that nothing is more important than assuring the highest standards of animal care are met, and our accreditation process does that. Financial stability. We accredit for 5 years, unless something bad happens during that 5-year period, in which we can pull accreditation. But we accredit for 5 years, and we want to make sure that the zoo has sufficient funds to maintain those accreditation standards 365 days a year for that 5-year period. We look at risk management, conservation education programs. That's a crucial role of zoos, connecting people to nature and inspiring them to help us take conservation action. Conservation efforts. We'll talk about some examples later, but think of your eastern black rhino. Safety, really critical one for a zoo or aquarium. Safety for animals, staff, and visitors. Staffing levels. We want to make sure that there are sufficient number of staff and that they're adequately trained. Governance. We want to make sure that the roles and responsibility of the governing body and its relationship with the CEO are outlined and are met. And clearly, we want to make sure that the CEO has the authority to make the decisions regarding the animals, the programs, and the staff. Guest services. Those important things like, are there enough bathrooms? How's the food? Those are the kinds of standards that we look at. And our process begins with a lengthy self-evaluation process, including making sure that the zoo has all the policies and procedures that we require, that they're up to date, and that they're not just sitting on the shelf, but that they're implemented. And after that self-evaluation, we send in an inspection team. We sent in a team of 3 zoo professionals. They were here for a 3-day period. A member of the team is always a veterinarian, and then we look for expertise in husbandry and administration. Your zoo is a driver for tourism in South Dakota with around 315,000 guests each year. Nationally, the 231 AZA accredited zoos and aquariums serve more than 186 million visitors annually, generating an impact of $21 billion in economic activity and creating 176,000 jobs. In fact, more people visit a zoo each year than all major league sporting events combined. Great Plains Zoo is a valuable community resource. I think it's a gem, it's a treasure, providing visitors with opportunities to connect with the natural world and see animals they might not otherwise see, only in a classroom textbook or in a video. Beyond the important community benefits, your zoo is an economic driver. I know it's one of the most important, most popular attractions in South Dakota and has significant economic impact on your community to the tune of over $20 million. It employs 46 persons full-time, about 96 employees in the summer, and spends a total of $5 million on salaries, goods and services each year, not including the private dollars raised and spent on exhibits and infrastructure. I was here 6 years ago, and I can tell you, I see the impressive growth that your zoo has experienced. Each year, the Great Plains Zoo, again, I've said this before, serves about 315,000 annual visitors. 315,000 annual visitors. That's about 2.5 times its 2005 attendance. And the zoo is drawing about half its summer visitors from outside of Sioux Falls, from a 3-hour radius in the 4-state area. Memberships have tripled since 2005. Your zoo is a destination for affordable family fun and is an anchor for the tourism industry in your state. The Great Plains Zoo is one of the most popular gated attractions in South Dakota, and I think it's easy to see why. AZA accredited zoos are some of the best places for you and your family to get connected to nature and become engaged in conservation action. With the constant decline of biodiversity on our planet, zoos must find ways to convey the importance and the interconnectivity of all living things. At the core of every AZA accredited zoo and aquarium is the commitment to inspire the public and then to engage them in significant conservation education programs and conservation action. Your zoo is a center for education, providing hands-on experience that simply cannot be duplicated in a traditional classroom. Each year, the Great Plains Zoo educates 40,000 children through special programs, camps, classes, and outreach programs. The education provided by your zoo's staff helps ignite a lifelong interest in nature and conservation. And many of the education programs at the Great Plains Zoo have a STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math focus. Thanks to a generous community partner, the zoo was recently able to expand its Zoo Mobile program to add 96 poverty-level schools in 42 South Dakota school districts to its educational footprint over 3 years. That's very impressive. As the attendance numbers show, your zoo is a successful regional attraction. To continue to provide a meaningful experience for visitors, the zoo must continue to grow and modernize. 10 years ago, under the leadership of Elizabeth Whaley, the zoo undertook a strategic master planning process. The planning included both facility plans and business forecasts. The philosophy of the plan was to replace aging infrastructure and connect already excellent parts of the zoo. Each new project is designed to create multiple visitor wows, be revenue positive, provide opportunities to engage the public, and be sustainable and realistic, and of course, be better environments for the animals in their care. Your zoo has moved briskly on an impressive number of improvements over the last decade, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the new exhibits in the last 10 years. Your Asian cat exhibit. In 2008, the zoo unveiled a beautiful new Asian cat exhibit featuring panoramic views of Amur tigers, snow leopards, and Pallas cats. This improvement also addressed some safety issues with the cat holding building, which is an important standard for AZA accreditation. The area of the Asian cat exhibit is also themed with colorful pagodas and a working gong. These elements help tell the story of the endangered animals that call the Asian steppes home. The Hy-Vee face-to-face farm. In 2009, the zoo transformed the former children's zoo into the colorful and fun Hy-Vee face-to-face farm. This area brings kids up close to animals with feeding and petting opportunities with 5 times the number of animals, along with goat bridges and camel rides. The new enhancement to the Hy-Vee face-to-face farm replaced a 40-year-old infrastructure that, quite frankly, had outlived its useful life. This partnership was renewed in 2014, resulting in more enhancements, including a new barn roof. Rare rhinos of Africa. Black rhinos are critically endangered, with fewer than 5,000 surviving in the wild. In 2010, the zoo opened a new state-of-the-art Eastern black rhino exhibit. In addition to providing a larger space for the zoo's rhinos, this new tree-lined exhibit transports visitors to Africa without leaving Sioux Falls. The Rare Rhinos of Africa exhibit represents the dramatic shift from the old model of viewing animals in their exhibits to having hands-on experiences while learning about the natural world. It engages and excites visitors about rhinos, Africa, and conservation. It's also home to an important effort in rhinoceros breeding and saving the species from extinction. I had the pleasure this morning of seeing your year-old calf. Very cute. The Great Plains Zoo has been very successful in breeding rhinos with 3 calf births since 2005. And it's important to note that there are only 57 Eastern black rhinos in AZA facilities in North America, so the Great Plains Zoo has had a significant impact on the breeding program of this species. Let's see. I also want to acknowledge that Lisa Smith, the zoo's Senior Director of Animal Programs, is the coordinator for the AZA Species Survival Program for Eastern black rhino, and I want to publicly thank her for that important work. This is very important to note because as a mid-sized zoo, your leadership at your zoo participates fully in the programs of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. For that, I'm very thankful, and hopefully you're proud of them for doing that. 4 years ago, your zoo became one of only 14 U.S. zoos to care for Japanese macaques, also known as snow monkeys. The Monkeys Magic and More project also reworked the front of the zoo and museum and created an entrance that is engaging and iconic so that people not only recognize it as being part of your zoo, but also part of your community. I was last here in 2011 when this project was under construction. The fence was right up there, couldn't see a thing. So I was very thrilled today to see it. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful completed habitat for snow monkeys. And later this afternoon, I was able to go behind the scenes of this remarkable exhibit, and I want to assure you that this exhibit exceeds expectations from both the visitor standpoint as well as the animal care perspective. In the fall of 2015, AZA, so colleagues, AZA colleagues bestowed one of the profession's highest honors to your snow monkey exhibit with the award for top honors in exhibit design. This is a big deal. It is something that the zoo has to compete for with many other larger institutions. I can certainly see why the Great Plains Zoo Snow Monkey exhibit was given this prestigious honor. Construction is underway on one of the oldest and most popular exhibits at the zoo, the brown bear exhibit. I think maybe 45 minutes ago, I was walking in that brown bear exhibit. No brown bears there yet. The project will improve bear holding, substrate, enrichment opportunities, and pond filtration and water usage. From an AZA perspective, this renovation is a very important step forward for the zoo's management of these charismatic creatures, and we applaud this transformative effort. The zoo is currently finalizing plans to use hands-on activities and creative signage to create dynamic science, technology, engineering, arts, and math learning opportunities for families and school groups. By the time your zoo opens the new brown bear exhibit in spring 2018, or maybe it's early summer 2018, your zoo will have replaced a great amount of old, non-functional infrastructure from a previously crumbling zoo with more than $14 million in enhancements within the past 10 years. I want to say that again. By the time your zoo opens its new brown bear exhibit in 2018, your zoo will have replaced a great amount of old, non-functional infrastructure from a previously crumbling zoo. More than $14 million in enhancements within the past 10 years. And the majority of that comes from private investors. Your citizens are getting a good deal and a great zoo. Every zoo and aquarium is a work in progress and must continue to make improvements. The zoo's new master plan highlights several fantastic improvements to be made to the Africa area of the zoo. The first phase of this plan is bringing the roar of lions back to Sioux Falls. I understand that next spring the zoo will participate in the community appeals campaign to raise $1.4 million for the zoo's lion exhibit. This will be a great and worthwhile investment from your community. Not only will this be another tremendous attendance driver, but it will also have global impact. Researchers predict that big cats in the wild could be gone by 2040. This project positions your zoo as a key player in the international efforts to preserve this amazing, amazing animal. Your involvement with lion conservation will help save these animals in the wild as you delight kids and all guests with a lively pride of lions. Meerkats will play an important role in an outdoor exhibit that rounds out an expansive African area with already excellent views of rhinos, zebras, giraffe, and ostriches. What's particularly laudable about all these improvements is the great amount of private support your zoo has assembled and how much value it gets out of these dollars raised. As you know, the operation of your zoo is a public-private partnership, meaning the zoo is run by a nonprofit organization on city land and maintaining city facilities. That is a very traditional way that zoos operate in the United States. Your city provides a management fee for the nonprofit to run the organization. I think your city's getting a great deal. Your city's financial contribution is significantly lower than the national average among zoos with this model. Your contribution for the operation is about 30% of its budget. Nationally, zoos and cities who share this model contribute about 50%. This is, of course, separate from the exhibit funding needed for progressive zoos, which are, of course, need to refresh and keep attractions maintained and exciting in order to drive attendance as well as in order to meet the ever-evolving and changing standards of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Here, too, your zoo leadership have made aggressive strides and thanks to proactive fundraising have been able to briskly move through their strategic master plan. You have a fantastic koala exhibit at the front of the zoo. I'm hoping that a number of you have had the opportunity to see them. If not, you need to get out there fairly quickly because I think they're not there for much longer. I'm sure you've heard how rare it is to find a koala exhibit. In zoos, only 10 U.S. zoos are currently caring for koalas, and those are on West Coast, East Coast, or in 2 large zoos in Ohio. Through the Great Plains Zoo's partnership with San Diego Zoo Global this summer, the zoo supports koala conservation efforts in the wild. Zoos are now an important source of information and support to field researchers who benefit from the daily weight, body condition, and feeding information zookeepers keep. And it sounds like the Koala Wilds exhibit is doing exactly what the zoo leadership hoped for, driving interest and excitement while connecting staff to real-world conservation efforts by providing data points to researchers in the wilds. Keepers do 2 keeper chats daily talking about koalas. I was able to hear one this afternoon, and I know that there are camp activities involving koalas, and attendance is up 20% over this time last year. But zoos are more than just a fun family outing. They're a resource for research. They're an ark for endangered species and a source of rich, informal learning experiences for children. AZA zoos combined see over 50 million children a year. I think that's only second to the number of children seen by schools in the United States. And AZA zoos and aquariums have a unique responsibility and opportunity to help slow species declines and extinction. We have thousands of veterinarians, scientists, and animal care experts with the expertise to help endangered species. And we have a proven track record. More than 30 species have been brought back from the brink of extinction because of the work of AZA zoos and aquariums and our partners, including 2 iconic species. California condor, we would not have California condor in the United States but for the work of AZA accredited zoos. American bison, we would not have American bison, which was recently named the United States mammal. We would not have American bison but for AZA accredited zoos. The Great Plains Zoo is a major player in regional and global conservation efforts. They work with your local game, fish, and parks department on raptor rehabilitation, and they participate in regional otter tagging and relocation. On a global scale, the Great Plains Zoo is a leader in the field of eastern black rhino care and breeding and supports projects in the field for snow leopards and African wild dogs, or painted dogs. The impact of the Great Plains Zoo goes far beyond here in Sioux Falls. This is a dynamic organization that is truly making a difference around the world. The Great Plains Zoo is one of many AZA accredited zoos working to protect animals and habitats. A few years ago, AZA initiated a program to harness the collective expertise of our staff and to identify new threats to endangered and threatened species, develop conservation action plans in concert with many other non-government observers working on the same species, and then engage the public. In 2015, AZA launched Saving Animals from Extinction, or our SAFE program. When we launched that program, we identified 10 safe signature species on which we would focus our planning and conservation action, including the black rhino, which is cared for at your zoo. And I want to also acknowledge that your zoo is one of the founding members of our SAFE founding circle members. The Great Plains Zoo is very involved with AZA conservation efforts, and they've supported international efforts to save species, including the vaquita. They're a porpoise found only in a small area in the northern Gulf of California. They are the world's rarest marine mammal. A recent survey estimates fewer than 30 are left in the wild. A primary threat to vaquita is entanglement in gill nets used for capturing fish, and shrimp. And our AZA SAFE program will provide a new approach to save this species. We are working to rescue the 30 remaining vaquita from the wild, bring them into outdoor ocean pens, and protect them from next fall's fishing season. It's our hope, it's a very risky project, but you know, that we collectively as a community did not want to see this animal go extinct on our watch. So it is our hope to rebuild, working with the Mexican government, to rebuild the population and eventually reintroduce them back in the wild. With our scientific expertise and partners, AZA and our partnering zoos, like the Great Plains Zoo, are truly working to save animals from extinction. Let's talk about your zoo leadership. Not only is the Great Plains Zoo involved in international conservation effort, but members of your zoo team are also helping shape the profession through national committee service as well as individual leadership roles. In October, Elizabeth Whaley, the Great Plains Zoo president and CEO, will become part of the AZA's National Board of Directors. There are only 13 folks that serve on this Board of Directors. She was elected to this position. I'm very proud of her, and I hope you all are too. Clearly, the AZA community recognizes her strong leadership abilities, and the AZA Board of Directors will benefit from her perspective and expertise. In addition, Elizabeth currently serves as a mentor in our Executive Leadership Development Program. This is an initiative we started 4 years ago to develop talent and leadership for individuals who wish to advance to the role of director within an AZA accredited zoo or aquarium. Dan Simon, who's the zoo's Vice President of Operations, was one of those emerging leaders identified in this program's second year. Elizabeth and Dan also contribute to several national committees, the Honors and Awards Committee and the Trends Committees, respectively. Lisa Smith, who's the zoo's Senior Director of Animal Programs, is the Species Survival Plan Coordinator for the Eastern Black Rhino. Along with a team of population biologists and species experts, the coordinator makes recommendations for breeding pairs using a number of factors, including age and genetics. Lisa also serves in a leadership position for other taxa, including warthog, antelope, giraffe, and wild cattle. So in terms of facility quality, veterinary and animal care, attendance, and animal collection, your Great Plains Zoo is really punching above its weight class. I hope you're very proud of your zoo and the professional staff you have. They're not only creating top-notch experiences for visitors, but also providing high-quality animal management and contributing greatly to the leadership of the zoo and aquarium profession. Any organization is only as good as its people, and your zoo leadership, Elizabeth Whaley, has gathered a group of bright, progressive professionals dedicated to your zoo's mission of fostering a greater understanding of the natural world through education, conservation, recreation, and discovery. Each department, from guest services to animal care, is represented by a group of very committed and very talented individuals. When an organization is filled with enthusiastic and knowledgeable people, it continues its forward progression, and your community too has responded with tremendous support of the zoo and its staff. And I know how important the local support is to the success of the zoo. Again, I want to congratulate the Great Plains Zoo on another successful bid for accreditation. Fewer than 10% of the approximately 2,800 licensed exhibitors by the U.S. Department of Agriculture are AZA accredited, so it is the cream of the crop. I am very proud to say that the Great Plains Zoo stands shoulder to shoulder with the premier animal care institutions in the country, and I want to congratulate you on this gem in your city. In my role, I have the pleasure of visiting many of our 231 member zoos and aquariums, and I've seen firsthand why your zoo has been granted this badge of excellence by AZA. 10 years ago, I'd say your zoo was probably in distress. But in the years since then, your zoo has made rapid progress in a number of areas of operation, including replacing the old infrastructure and providing needed enhancements in exhibits and facilities. Your zoo not only made those needed fixes, but has also created a sound financial footing through dynamic fundraising and has recruited highly professional staff, built major visitor wows, not to mention more than doubling attendance and tripling membership, managing those 1,000 animals from 137 species, and working on 24 endangered species programs. The result is you have a vibrant, progressive zoo. It definitely takes more than Elizabeth and her dedicated staff. It also takes the support of the Zoological Society of Sioux Falls and its boards, citizen supporters, Mayor Huther, and you, the members of the City Council. It takes all of these partners to have a 21st century world-class zoo, and I want to commend you for that, tell you how proud I am to be here to share in this congratulatory message, and say thank you for your part in that. And is it appropriate now for me to say, are there any questions?
Yes, it is. Chris, thanks for a glowing report.
Thank you.
It's wonderful to have this type of report presented to the council. So at this time, I will open it up to questions. Councilor Selber.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, a terrific presentation. It's
Thank you.
exciting to hear how far our zoo has come over the last few years. With this new designation, does this open up any additional types of grants or funding for the zoo, or does it, in a second part to the question, does it help them get maybe animals or species here that maybe they wouldn't if they did not?
Very good question. So the first part, and they have been accredited before. I don't want to leave you with that impression that they've not. I believe this is their 5th accreditation, but again, they have to go through it anew every time. But as to your question on financial perspective, there are some federal grants. One of them is the Institute of Museum and Library Services grant. While they don't require that somebody be AZA accredited, it certainly is of note, and IMLS knows of AZA and its accreditation programs and how tough they are. So I know it provides a few extra points, if you will. Certainly the National Science Foundation is a possibility for zoos and aquariums to apply to those. And again, because of our rigorous standards, they get a few extra points, if you will. As to animals, yes, there is a benefit of being AZA accredited is that other AZA accredited zoos and aquariums will exchange animals with you. There are many AZA accredited institutions that if the Great Plains Zoo lost its accreditation, were denied accreditation, any animals on loan from other AZA institutions, they would pull them from your zoo. And much of what is done in the zoo and aquarium business is a lot of animal loaning. There's very few buying and selling. So yes, it is a benefit to be accredited for that ability to exchange animals and certainly the ability to participate in the species survival programs. And those come with things like breeding recommendations for your rhinos and breeding recommendations for your newly acquired African wild dogs.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Erickson.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to thank you for your presentation. As a mom of 3 young boys, we've been a member at the zoo for 10 plus years, and so it's certainly a place that we've gone for many, many years at all times, from the inside exhibits to the outside, and it really has come a long way in 10 years. And so I thank those that are involved for their determination to making sure that this stays a gem and that we're continually to reinvest money in it. The other thing that I just want to state for anyone that's maybe not doing anything on August 3rd. They do have their fundraiser, their event, the Jungle Jubilee. It's a great opportunity to see the animals up close. There are amazing things on auction. It's a great opportunity to mingle through those that support the zoo and see what's coming up next as well. So if anybody's interested, August 3rd, I know we got an email on it as well, but I've been many times, and it's a great opportunity to see the zoo a little bit differently, in a different light. So I hope that you can all
Thank you for that plug. I'm only sorry I won't be here August 3rd.
Any other comments or questions? Councilor Neitzer.
Yeah, with a daughter who's 9 years old, it's been an amazing transformation in the last 10 years. Having moved back here 12 years ago, the difference is really night and day. It's amazing what the zoo has done. And I do have to say, my daughter took part in I think it was like a zoo veterinary class. She got to see how they take care of the animals last week. And
Zoo clinic, probably?
Yeah, she thoroughly enjoyed it. She really liked it. I don't know if this may be more of a question for Elizabeth, but there's been one or two big losses at the zoo recently, and I was just curious if there was how that's impacted the zoo, how that may may they be replaced, the animals that we've lost.
Yeah,
recently.
and I'll certainly ask her to respond specifically, and unfortunately, animals are living beings. As great care as they receive from zoos and aquariums, unfortunately, they too don't live forever. And I know that that is why we are so vigorous in our animal care programs and our veterinary medicine. And I know they have a very, very good veterinarian. So I'm sure she did everything in her power to save that animal. But Elizabeth, would you like to respond to the specifics?
Of course. I'm assuming you're talking about Kenai, our brown bear.
Yes.
Who was a huge favorite. Came to us 23 years ago as a cub, as a 6-month-old cub with her brother Smokey, and so has been a favorite for years and years. Even though brown bears can live up into their 40s under human care, much less time in the wild, because of course, in a zoo, you have your medical needs taken care of daily. You're enriched, and you work with your zookeepers, and they bring you great food. So those lifespans are typically higher under human care, even though the median for those animals is about mid-20s. So at 23, that was an age that we had hoped she would reach up into those, could be in their 40s, but that was a very typical lifespan for a bear under human care. We, of course, felt a real loss. That was a favorite animal of ours, but the fact is all of our more than 1,000 animals get terrific care every day of the year. They get enrichment, which in our world might mean food treats, but it might mean sounds, it might mean things that they can manipulate, so things to make not only their life under human care more pleasant and interesting, but also to develop and keep in place those natural behaviors like foraging if you're a bear. So I have to tell you that in her last days, she succumbed to cancer. So in her last days, we wanted to make her time really special and, of course, comfortable for her. All of our animals are on nutrition plans. You may not know that animals have their own nutritionists. And with our veterinarian, we build their diets to be very specific and very healthy. So it's one of the few times I would have heard our veterinarian, Dr. Bergdorf, say, let's get her a little pie. And in her last days, she got lots of interaction from her zookeepers, lots of loving goodbyes, lots of special treats that included a whole watermelon. It included some pie. It included some other sweets. But typically, that's not on the menu because we want to keep them really healthy.
So I guess my big question was, and I assume that it must be quite an emotional blow for a lot of the employees. There must be a lot of bond. It must really hurt almost. I don't know if it's like losing a pet or not. I guess you'd have to tell me, but I guess I was just curious. I don't know how easy it is for you to just go out and find another bear. That's kind of what I was getting at was, is it something where you can obtain these easily, or is that?
So in the past, the council and we have talked about how we do animal transactions, and the fact is we do between 500 and 600 animal transactions a year. And so a big part of a few of our animal care professionals, a big part of their day is working on transactions, whether it's moving our eastern black rhino to, for example, Des Moines a couple of years ago to start his own family of eastern black rhinos, or other animals moving into other situations in other zoos. So we spend a lot of time making sure that animals go to the right place or come to us for the right reasons. That could include breeding recommendations. And in the case of bears, zoos really aren't breeding brown bears because there are so many nuisance bears that require rescue from the wild. So in the places where we have brown bears, Alaska, Montana, the coasts, the national parks, there are lots of human-bear interactions, and often that means the bear is told, not again, and one of the ways to make sure a bear doesn't get into trouble with a human is to get it out of that situation and relocate it into a zoo. So we currently have 2 cubs that are waiting for us, being held for us for our new exhibit by the Indianapolis Zoo. And then we also have the opportunity to locate as many as 2 other bears to be part of that brand new brown bear exhibit. So we can have up to as many as 4 brown bears. And while we hope there's never a need for a rescue from the wild, we hope that no bear gets orphaned or gets into trouble or becomes a nuisance, we know that that happens with that species, and we're here to help.
Councilor Rolfe.
Just a short, real quick comment. As a family who used to live just south of the zoo, bringing back the roaring lions will be fantastic. I can remember sitting out on our deck and hearing those lions at sunset. It was magnificent to be able to, the kids would go, "What was that, Dad?" That's the lions over at the zoo. And then they'd recognize it and just, they loved it. Yeah, and so did we.
What a fantastic experience
Yeah.
for your kids. And now think about kids and grandkids that may never see a lion or a tiger or a big cat in any other way other than on an iPad or on a screen or on the flat page of a book, because they're going extinct in the wild unless zoos make a point to save them from extinction. And how exciting for us that we get to be a part of that. So it's not only going to be a fantastic exhibit with up to 10 stalking, rolling, fun lions that we get to watch, but it's also a part of the global conservation effort toward big cats that Chris was telling you about just a few minutes ago.
Thank you. Councilor Neitzer.
One more. So now we're talking about animals. How are elephants doing with ivory, with poaching for ivory? And is that something that would ever be appropriate here, an elephant?
It's, would you ever have elephants here? Is that was that your last part of your question?
Yeah.
Ooh, so I would say one of the things I said is, you're a right-sized zoo for the right-sized community. I don't think you're the right-sized zoo or community for elephants. They take a huge footprint to care for them appropriately. And to be honest, they're really expensive. They would eat up a huge portion of the zoo's budget. To the first part of your question, how are we doing on, this horrendous poaching of elephants for their ivory? I wish I had, I wish I could tell you this rosy answer that we're doing better. It's led by organized crime. I mean, it's on the same level as human trafficking. So there are major organizations, major police organization, narcotics organizations that are helping work on anti-poaching of elephants. So it's there are certain things that keep me up at night. I worry. Are elephants going to go extinct in my lifetime? And when I have had the distinct pleasure a number of times of going to see them in the wild, and it's amazing. And just the thought that they could go extinct during my lifetime just makes me wilt, quite frankly. So more to be done. Certainly zoos and aquariums, we have actively participated and were active in the and a program called 96 Elephants that was actually led by the Wildlife Conservation Society. The Bronx Zoo is a part of them, so we have 5 members of the Wildlife Conservation Society. They led this program called 96 Elephants, and through this initiative, and getting lots of people to sign petitions, et cetera, worldwide, we were able to get some markets closed. And unfortunately, the U.S. is a market. We're not the biggest one, but we're the second biggest market for ivory. Yeah, which is amazing, not something I'm proud of. But we have managed to get laws passed more and more states to close the domestic ivory market. The biggest market, China, one of the most amazing things that happened in this last year was they agreed to close their markets, and they were the big market. So now there's still markets in Thailand and Vietnam and Laos, but more to come, and we're continuing to work on that big project. Thanks for the question.
Are there any other comments? I have just a few.
Sure.
It's obvious that everybody of all ages have a soft spot for animals. Mm-hmm. And as I mentioned at the beginning of our question period, it's nice to receive a report of this nature. One of the stats that jumped out at me was 315,000 annual visitors, a 230% increase.
That's huge.
Just in the last 12 years. That is just absolutely phenomenal, Elizabeth. Good job. And Chris, thank you for your efforts with SAFE, the Saving Animals from Extinction project, because that is an important project and purpose. I'm the type of guy that will pick up the spider and take it outside for fear of upsetting the delicate balance of nature.
Good for you. Thank you for doing that.
I don't do that with flies, however.
Oh, okay. Well.
And Elizabeth, your staff playing a major role at the national level in several AZA efforts, including everything that was listed. That's just phenomenal as well, too, because I do fully understand. You often get back more than what you give when you participate at that level, because you're exposed to so many individuals and so many different ways. So I congratulate you on that, as well as being in the top 10% of accredited zoos. Elizabeth, I'd like you to stand and be recognized for your accomplishments with our Sioux Falls Zoo. Thank you very much for the great report.
Thank you for the opportunity to present before you today. And once again, congratulations and thanks for your part and your support of your Great Plains Zoo.
Thank you, Chris. Next presentation is our annual ambulance service report, and Director Franken. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Jill Franken, Public Health Director with the City of Sioux Falls. In front of you is the annual ambulance contract performance report. It's a requirement of the Health Department to complete this report each year. To kick us off, Gary Myers, our REMSA Board Chair, is here to make some remarks about this report on behalf of the REMSA Board. Gary?
Welcome, Gary.
Good evening, council members. Thank you. As Jill said, you have in front of you the annual ambulance report. It was presented to the REMSA Board by the Health Department 2 weeks ago at our meeting. The REMSA Board reviewed it, confirmed everything that was in it, and approved it. I have to say that we are very proud of the report and the information that's in there. It is all very factual. All of the information comes from Paramedics Plus and the other entities that participate in the EMS system. And again, we're very proud with the statistics and data that are being presented to you today. I know a lot of talk about mutual aid and response times. I encourage you all to look at the full report and concentrate not only on those things, but also in the quality of care that is delivered by Paramedics Plus and the EMS system. Those quality measures that are monitored by REMSA, reported to REMSA through the Health Department, and then we confirm every time we get together. And then also consider the amount of impact that Paramedics Plus has had in our community. There's a lot of information there about their community outreach and the things that they do in their community besides just response. So again, I encourage you to look at all of those things. If you have any questions for me, I'll be here, so please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary.
All right, thank you, Gary. And also a big thanks to all 5 of the REMS volunteer board members for their service for our community. Next, I'm pleased to introduce Mike Bureau, Paramedics Plus Chief Operating Officer, who will provide you with their annual report as well. Along with him is Mark Postma here, Vice President of Paramedics Plus, but I think Mike's going to kick off the presentation. So,
Thank you. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Sioux Falls City Council, for giving me an opportunity once again to get up in front of you and to have a chance to dialogue and fill you in on where we've been. I believe the last time I was up here was in October. At that time, we did a short 6-month after we talked about the pilot study. During that time, I touched base on the fact that we'd received officially the Bronze Award for Mission Lifeline, and we also discussed the completion of our CAS accreditation, originally recognized, I believe, October 31st of 2016, which will expire in October 31st of 2019. So I will not be touching on those 2 topics today, being that we addressed them at the 6th month. So to begin, I'd like to talk again about Mission Lifeline. So this year, Paramedics Plus received the Silver Plus Award. So what this oversees is really, it concentrates on STEMI patients. So patients who are actively having a heart attack that is recognized in the field and then getting them to a cath lab. So there's really 3 criteria here that we look at. We look at patients who are 35 years or older, who are treated and receive an EKG in the field within 10 minutes of being at the patient's side, that those patients have that EKG sent off to a hospital and they're taken to an appropriate STEMI facility, and that of those patients that meet those other 2 criteria, they reach the ER where that care is passed on to doctors. They're taken up to the cardiac cath lab and a device is placed within 90 minutes. So all that data is pulled together, whether or not we did that 12 lead, whether or not that 12 lead was sent off, whether it was done in 10 minutes, and whether or not they went to the right facility, and whether or not the doctors got the proper device in 90 minutes. And all that is kind of crunched those numbers. And we were able to successfully meet the threshold that was necessary, so we were awarded the Silver Plus. I am especially happy this year because they changed the standings and allowed us to add an additional partner. So when we first began this project, we added Sioux Falls Fire Department. We're very lucky in the city of Sioux Falls to have an EMS system, and we allow together as a system to have Sioux Falls Fire Rescue do a 12 lead upon arrival. We do a second one and check theirs and forward that. That is very rare. To see BLS first response arrive on scene and do a 12 lead and have that ready for an ALS arriver is very, very rare in this industry. And we're very lucky to have that here. This year we were able to add Sioux Falls Police Department as well, because some of those patients that data comes from are patients who suffer cardiac arrest and then we go through a full resuscitation with. And our police department plays a very important role in those priority 1 cardiac arrests. By getting the AED to that patient's side and starting early CPR. So we're very thrilled to be able to add them as well this year to that award. So we'll be presenting those both to them when we receive our official. I know that we just talked about Mission Lifeline. Recently there's been some discussion talking about other times, so I wanted to put up a couple times from you pulled out of tab below. We have some clinical outcomes here this year that I'm sharing with you. The first one is stroke. So this is dispatched to hospital. And I just kind of gave you a general overview. So this is from the moment that that call is dispatched by Metro 911. That timer starts to the time that we deliver that patient to a hospital. We hit at destination button inside the hospital's ambulance bay. So you can see the first one is the median time, the average time, and then I gave you the 90th percentile as well as what that time looked like. We have, out of this data that I use, is a very narrow definition. When I pulled this, we wanted to make sure that we had patients who were confirmed that that was their final diagnosis and that they made sure that they hit the appropriate button in their EPCR to pull that. So they had all of their clinical rules out. They were sure when they got there. So this is a very narrow view in terms of those numbers. When we look at strokes in Sioux Falls, we generally look for a delta of about 8 hours from the time of onset of either disability or inability to speak or patient showing aphasic or any of those types of things. Once we start our QA process here in the City of Sioux Falls, we look at about 15 minutes or less on scene time. So, you know, you figure that's about a 5-minute there, that's a 5-minute emergency. We get to about 25 minutes as an average mean. When we move down to trauma, in the City of Sioux Falls, we like to follow the standard. It's kind of nationally been accepted through most trauma designations, and that's about a 10-minute on-scene time. So there we have a median time of about 22 minutes and 48 seconds, with average time about 23, 25. And when I say trauma, I don't mean fall down, break your arm. I mean true trauma alert patients who require, you know, a trauma surgeon at either of the two facilities. So as you can see, the system works very, very well at getting, first of all, the appropriate call triaged and getting it prioritized by Metro 911 for us to be able to meet these times, and then getting the proper resources, whether that be PD and fire, and us. Moving back to cardiology for a moment here, City of Sioux Falls has long been active in the CARES Registry. We talked about this a bit last year. I'll talk about it for a few minutes here. So this is the Cardiac Arrest Registry to Enhance Survival. This predates us. As I said, this is something Sioux Falls has been a participant in for a very long time. And we are very proud to be a part of that. So we have an increased survivability in all cardiac events within the City of Sioux Falls. So the CARES average is 10%. Here in the Sioux Falls, survivability is actually 15%. So that 5% doesn't sound like a large number. When you look at the numbers of patients nationwide, 5% is a huge, huge improvement in benefit. Moving down, we'll get to the second one there. We have significant cardiac survival aided by defibrillation. I believe, Counselor, recently you talked about the AED and having the class. This is exactly how that relates back to the citizens of Sioux Falls. So we have, on average, a 33% survival. In the City of Sioux Falls, that's at 55%. And once again, that speaks to our system. So that speaks to, first of all, the fire department and us working on CPR classes and community education and getting into businesses and AED projects in businesses. Someone getting off and calling 911, Metro Communications, not taking no for an answer, and having somebody do CPR on scene and getting an AED there. If there's not an AED there, it's police department being the first on scene with their on-vehicle AEDs and getting them on a patient's side and starting CPR. As the fire department getting there, moving on, getting the patient set, getting an advanced airway set, and then eventually an ALS provider getting the patient's side to move on to cardiac drugs if necessary. But really, the significant difference comes in early CPR, hands-only CPR, and early defibrillation. And this speaks to it greatly. So 55% here in the City of Sioux Falls, a significant improvement over the national average in CARES. I gave you a copy here of our CARES, a copy of our employee engagement slide. I apologize for that. I apologize on yours as well. You may notice that on the bottom slide I have Sunstar EMS provides me with a safe work environment in the bottom there. I apologize, that was originally our pilot. It came out of our Pinellas operation, and the original materials had that. After I sent yours to the printer, I realized it and went in and recreated it for the slide. So I apologize. So where we're moving forward here is kind of looking at our overall employee engagement. We told you last year we were going to get ready to do a study. I was recently at the Safe Tech Leadership course about a year ago, and we had a giant talk about employee engagement in Gallup Q12 or Q15s if you want to add a couple of questions of your own, and how important it is. This is a changing field. Healthcare is changing. Education in healthcare is changing. EMS is changing. And I think it's important for leaders to get a good sense of what their employees are actually looking for in terms of a career and what directions we need to go to in the future. I'm not the person who's going to eventually run this thing. Someday there's going to be somebody who's working the streets right now who's going to, hopefully be running this ambulance system in Sioux Falls. So it's important to know how do we set them up for success and what do we have to do to get them there. So we split, it's a standard Gallup Q12. We split ours into a series of 6 5 questions. The first one being the first set of questions focusing on the environment of the work where they live. So the thing that as a leader I can influence. Do you have the equipment do you need? Do we have a culture that's kind of supportive to what you need? Then we move on to a true culture. Do we have a leadership that you consider to be appropriate? Do you have a good relationship with your supervisor? And then we move down to development. What do you need as a person to move forward and advance in your career and find fulfillment? And we know that that question is most important to millennials, where they differ from Gen Xers like myself. They're very concerned with what do they have and what do I offer them as an ability to grow forward. So we had and went and put those up. This was our first year. It's always scary to do an employee engagement. You're going to give them a piece of paper, and they're going to answer it honestly. So what we found here is that our engagement was sitting, as you can see, right around 20%. So these are people who strongly agree. These are people who, when we give them their question, they strongly agree in all those categories as a majority. When we move on to satisfied, that's generally considered to be strongly agree or agree. And then neutrals, of course, strongly agree or neutral. So they're all the same questions. I'm just breaking them down by groups for you. From most engaged to satisfied, I'm here, but I'm neither satisfied nor engaged. Doesn't mean they're unhappy at work. Just means they're not satisfied or moving towards engagement, which is where you, of course, ultimately want that ball to be. You can see here we had the American Ambulance Association Stars of Life. Up there in the third row is Lori Johansson. She's been an employee in Sioux Falls. Let's see if I get this right, because she long predates me. She began and entered into the EMS in the City of Sioux Falls in 1994 and has been with Sioux Falls Ambulance, Rural Metro, and now Paramedics Plus consistently. Over that period, she's worked with the Sioux Empire Critical Incident Stress Management Team. She continues to volunteer locally at Valley Springs. So we were happy to send her as one representative out of 108 to Washington, D.C. on June 12th through the 14th to be recognized there under the EMS Stars of Life. She's had a supportive role in our organization, not only as a field paramedic, but as a supervisor. She's worked through logistics, and we're very blessed to have her involved in our organization, and we're very lucky to have these type of people in this community, homegrown in this community, who have been in EMS here since 1994. Moving on to our wages and salaries. So since coming to town, we've increased the basic starting wage from EMT basic up by 15%. We've increased the paramedic starting wage by 17%. By 7%. We have created additionally a 3% experience bonus based on years, 3% per year. That came out of our employee engagement survey. That came from our employees. We asked them what they thought that we could do for recruitment, and they thought that that was a direction to go, and that was one we decided to go forward with. Additionally, as we've said before, we've given 16% total to the starting wage to all workforce, to the original workforce as well, that being made up of a 3%, a 3%, a 7%, and then a 4%. So 3% the first year across the board, and then a 7% followed by another 3% the next fiscal year, plus a 4%. Additionally here, you can see some people in that picture. So they have their masks on their head, and they're getting ready to go through their actual mask fitting, which is a federal regulation, to make sure that they have appropriate mask seals. So that's what they're doing there. So the important thing to remember is that when we talk about hiring and getting people in the door in wages and salaries, it's just not a matter of getting somebody in the door. It's not uncommon in EMS for someone to be hired into an organization to maybe spend 1 or 2 days, maybe a week at best, and then been released to the field at a patient's side and expected to give care. And as an industry, we feel okay about that. I mostly believe because most of these employees have gone through the National Registry at the EMT and the paramedic level, and as such, they've been tested in skills, and they've taken their written exams. And it's an expectation that because they've met those requirements, they should be able to care for a patient at a patient side appropriately. We don't do it that way. We haven't done that way since I started here. So we kind of run through an interview process. So it starts with a background check. From there, we do a certifications check. We go back and double check all their licensures, make sure that they're appropriate and correct. We then take them through and give them a clinical skills test before going into the actual sit-down interview. We then put them through a panel interview. So we feel like we really have a good grasp on them at that moment when they come forward of who they are. Then we put them into a 2-week in-house orientation. So during that point, we go over policies, we go over EVOC, which is emergency vehicle operations. So we do 8 hours in the classroom, and we do about 8 hours out on a track during that 2 weeks period. We also do an introduction to our equipment and our supplies. And then probably the biggest one we do is things that are specific to Sioux Falls. For example, we go to a lot of places where on one type of call you go to this door, but on another type of call you actually only go to this door. And it's very hard to get that across to a new employee. So we spend a lot of time coaching that almost 2 days of going through with what is this location, what's the door. So if you go to this facility and you need to go to skilled nursing, it's actually this door, what door is that? So we work with them to help them understand that before they get there, to take some of that stress and anxiety off when they see an address of what door they should be at. Also, it just kind of allows us to give better customer service to the actual places we're responding to. But we're still not done, so we clear them at that point. So right before we do that, we sit them down with Dr. Luther, and he sits down with them, and along with Scott Christensen, the guy sitting up here who's been there since, I think, 1996 with Sioux Falls Ambulance originally. And they sit down and they kind of go through, and Dr. Luther asks them some more questions and finds out where they're at and whether or not he feels they're comfortable going out to practice in the city of Sioux Falls. And as long as they pass that kind of interview and question period with Dr. Luther, we free them to move into actual training. So at that point, we then put them out from about 1 to 3 months, generally speaking, with a field training officer. So we pay the overtime cost to go ahead and put a third person on that truck and to put them out there. And their goal is to be there with that mentor and to start off and first just kind of learn how to talk to patients, to get a better feeling where things are at the town. How do you get places? How do you respond to things? It allows their field training officer to have an ability to kind of judge and gauge a new employee on where they're at and where they have gaps and where they can kind of help mentor them into the new areas. And then as that process goes forward over the next 3 months, they begin to take more and more control. So at the final stage of it, I'm really just paying the field training officer to be there so that they have someone standing behind them to say, it's safe, but you have this. And to give them just a couple more weeks to safely swim out there and to have 100% control of our patients and to take care of them. And then they come back again with Dr. Luther and take another exam and sit down with them. And then and only then, if we feel and their FTO feels and Dr. Luther presents it to the RIMSA Medical Board and they feel that this employee is ready, do they finally move forward to working independently. So I thought it was important to stretch that out. We talk about wages and salaries. It's just not a matter of getting people through the doors and raising rates. It's a matter of giving them an environment where we can get them skilled up to the appropriate level so they can give the appropriate care. Moving forward, we went on to customer satisfaction. We had some questions. I know I had heard some questions when I was watching Informational recently that came up to customer satisfaction. We put these up last year. I apologize on your handouts. The January through March light teal got deleted somehow at the printers, so you don't have it there, but if you'll follow along on the PowerPoint, you'll have a clear view of it there. So when I last presented to you in June of last year, I presented this same set of data. I wanted to give you a comparison. So I took everything from June to December and put it in one column, and then I gave you January to March 2017 in the lighter teal, just so we get a comparison. So overall, I believe there's 19 questions. I think that's a little long for a survey, but we go through PRC, and that is the questions that they present to us as a company to ask. So overall, from there, they break it down to 3 areas. So we have an overall emergency satisfaction. So when we're looking at this interview, these are patients who we've responded to in a 911 capacity. So what you're seeing here is people who strongly agree overall that their care was good, the clinical care was good, the ride was nice, the people were polite, they told me what they were doing. All of those questions fall into this overall emergency satisfaction. So they either strongly agree or agree. When we look at quality care, this is simply a direct question of, did you think that they took good care of me? Do you strongly agree or agree. Here's the percentile. And then the last one is broken out the piece of a likelihood of a recommendation to a friend or family member that the service was good. As you can see, we have some fluctuation. One's a little bit longer of a time period. So I think that plays a bit of a role of it. I have suspicions why we saw some changes between December 2016 and March 2017. I don't want to elaborate on those at the moment. We're still in the process of reviewing that. I'm also still interested in looking for companies that do this that give me the ability to dig in deeper. So when we looked at our employee surveys, the company that I use there really allows me to dig in. So I could see if it's a day or night. I can kind of see an age group. I can kind of see a zip code. I can kind of see. I can't do that with PRC. I'm hoping to find a vendor that will allow us to next year when I come up to report this to maybe have the ability to give you some more detailed information specifically on where we see changes and how that fluctuates. So we're still trying to find a better way to get a gauge on this. It was in the RFP. I think it's important for an industry to know how people think about you. What do they think of your care? What do they think about your overall satisfaction, the way you treated them, and would they recommend you? Yes, I have a contract, but it's important to me that a majority of people would still recommend me to their family. That's important to me, and it's important to my employees. You can see here we have emergency compliance. I think you've seen this before. We've just kind of run it forward here for you, June through May. So once again, this is when I last got up for the full in-depth till today. Kind of let that sit there for a while. I don't have a whole lot to comment about that. We present this monthly at REMSA, and you're welcome to attend that at any time. So we had some questions about growth. Last year when I presented this, I did number of transports. This year I changed it because we had some questions I had heard and watching council presentations with my wife at home. There had been some questions occasionally that came up about calls for service or what is the true burden of the system? So this year, when I presented you this information, I took it back to October 15 to May 2017, and I gave you the actual calls for service. So as you can see here, in March of 2016, you can kind of see the first spike. So we were up in June, and we were having some conversations about mutual aid and things. I think it's very interesting in terms of calls for service, you can see a spike. So in transport, you see a slight spike. In calls for service, you see a much larger increase if we were to compare those two records. Again, you come forward in November. You start to see November and December, we saw a bit of a return back to normal. And then this year we saw some seasonality in March and then again in April into May, where you can start to see some serious growth in terms of calls for service. Now, it's important to remember that calls for service does not necessarily equal transport, because not every call that we run on necessarily is transported. Patients refuse, other patients go other places. So just because we are of course seeing an increase, but it doesn't direct to a direct correlation. So a 4% growth in calls for service is not necessarily a 4% growth in transport. Those are two totally different matrices, even though they're related. I just wanted to make that point to you. And then overall, I was going to go fairly short on the system improvements. Company-wide, as an organization, we've gone forward with anti-theft devices. Every day, I can't open up a trade magazine, to be honest with you, in the EMS world and not see that there was an ambulance stolen somewhere. I'm not really sure why ambulances are what are always stolen, but it is a huge trend nationwide. And it's generally while there's a paramedic and EMT in the back with the patient, and someone just jumps in and drives off with an ambulance. I don't know if it's the lights, I don't know if it's the sirens, but it seriously is a national issue that's being discussed. So we made a decision to go forward with the company-wide anti-theft device. Of course, no anti-theft device. Let me add the caveat is 100% perfect, but we do believe that it helps protect the citizens and my employees. And then, of course, if we were to have an incident, the person we're going to drive off. We, of course, validated for you guys earlier this year that we went forward with pit crew CPR with both the police department, Sioux Falls Fire Rescue, and Paramedics Plus. So that is now forward and going out into the system, has been done with some great success. And then earlier this year, we got together to talk to you about the resource allocation pilot program. And I just wanted to close that when we came back to response times, I was looking back through my notes when I was preparing this, and I realized that in February of 2015, I had gotten up in front of the council for either the first or the second time to have a discussion. And at that time, we, of course, had not taken over the contract. And we made you a promise at that time that when we came and took over the system, that we were not going to run the system at 90%. We were going to try to give you 95%. And I just wanted to take a moment to remind the council today that, we have consistently kept that promise. We have kept it at, above 95%. And we'll continue to try to innovate and find creative ways to take care of people, because that's what my employees come to work every day to do. That's what I come to work every day to do, is to take care of people. I didn't start off in a business world. I started off in an ambulance sitting on a street corner for 12 hours running 911 calls, and this is where I am today. So with that, I'll close.
Thank you, Mr. Bureau.
Thank you, Mike. Before I just share one other item with you, I want to also acknowledge that we have EMS system leaders and some of our EMS system team members here. It's so challenging to talk about this without talking about us as a system, but today you heard from our leader of one segment of our EMS system, and that is Mike Bureau, your COO for your ambulance service in Sioux Falls. So again, thank you, Mike. That was a great presentation. Tonight, I want to talk a little bit about an item on the agenda for tonight, and that's for first reading, and that is ordinance to authorize the ambulance rate increase for Paramedics Plus. The agreement that is in place between City of Sioux Falls and Paramedics Plus stipulates that ambulance service will be provided without subsidy, and that the primary means of compensation will be through fee-for-service reimbursement of patient charges. In turn, annual rate increases will be at the greater of 3% or the consumer price index for any given year. All rates and charges for services shall be provided through the REMSA, shall be approved through REMSA and the City Council. So the CPI urban for this year, ending May of 2017, was 1.9%. Therefore, the Paramedics Plus rate increase for your consideration for approval is 3%. Tonight's City Council agenda, it'll be that first reading for your consideration. So I just wanted to make sure you're aware that that will be coming up tonight. So, and with that, that is our presentation, and thank you.
Thank you, Director Franken. Any questions or comments? Councilor Erpenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bureau, just a couple of questions. Thank you, Director Franken, appreciate it. My first one is just really basic. What can you describe for us? What is pit crew CPR?
Certainly. So pit crew CPR is a sweeping change in on-scene CPR that started just a couple years ago in some fairly progressive systems, and I was very happy that Sioux Falls was early to pick it up. So the idea is that in pit crew CPR, every person has a job in a cardiac arrest, and it's just like a pit crew in a racetrack. So the guy who does the tires always does the tires, and that's the expert at the tires, right? And that's his job. So we translate that into a cardiac arrest and taking care of a patient. So in Sioux Falls, it comes in, and the first person there starts chest compressions because, of course, hands-only CPR are very important. But where they sit when they do that is always the same in pit crew CPR. So maybe once upon a time you wanted to sit on the right, and then sometimes you sit on the left. Now in a pit crew CPR system, you always sit in the same spot to do CPR. Then the next person involved comes in and gets an advanced airway placement. So that person always goes to the head, and their job is to always place an advanced airway to get that started. And then when the paramedics come in, they always stand at the same spot so that they can control the monitor, so that they can start an IV line, so they can give medications. The same two partners in the team help put on the Lucas device, which is the machine that helps do cardiac compressions. So that's kind of that pit crew idea.
Interesting, really interesting. So as many people know, that one of my biggest concerns in this community is the living wage, and the way that we pay those people that are providing such important services to us, right? I also work for a company that runs that Gallup Q12, and you're doing the Q15, and it can be a nightmare in administration because it, as you intimated, you're giving people an anonymous survey. They can say anything they want. It's kind of terrifying to get those answers back. So my question is, you said that it came out of the Q12 last year that you're increasing the basic starting wage as a recruitment tactic, and so I'd like to understand a little bit more about that. What is that basic starting wage, and is it helping with recruiting?
Certainly. So the paramedic starting wage right out of school at this point is now $15 an hour, and then we allow a 3% bonus added onto that cumulatively up to 9 years. So someone with 9 years experience would of course make significantly more overall because it's 3% compounded for each year. At the EMT, when we came to the City of Sioux Falls, the starting wage was $9 or $9.25. At this time, it's $11. And then once again, we have the 3% built in for years of experience. And up to this point, we have always given, the entire time I've been with this company, we have always given an annual raise. I've never not experienced one in my 10 years with this company through good economy and bad. So it's always a recommendation that, that will continue forward in terms of annual service raises as per normal. Additionally, we have some additional avenues they can take. So one of those being we allow them to move into preceptorships and field training officers. Those pay between 2 to 5% tacked on, whether that's only when they're in that position where a field training officer receives that increase to pay all the time, because our expectation is they're always teaching. Even when they don't have a patient, if they see something in the hospital, or they see a crew do something, we expect that field training officer to take that leadership role to mentor and pull them off the side to go, there's a better way to do this. So that's kind of where that's at. It's fairly competitive. We got there by doing a true wage survey. We looked at South Dakota, and then to give us a place to kind of balance that against, we went into the cities and looked at some of the larger services and looked at where they were at and used that together to come up with what we could do. But of course, I have to balance that across the ability to deal with outside unforeseen forces. So for example, to give you an example here, I used to get one medication in December for a package of 10 for $41.31. Due to a national shortage, I am now buying it in packs of 10 at $389 in a matter of 1 month. Went from $40 to $389. So I need to leave myself enough room to be able to deal with that. I mean, this is a life-saving medication. It's not something we can't have. So that's just part of what you've asked us to do by contract, is to manage that.
Exactly, and I guess that points to that balance between, actually those concerns that are mine in terms of the argument about a living wage in Sioux Falls is that it's between $13 and about $15 an hour for a single person to be able to pay their own rent with only one job. And so we're right on the border, and these again are those people that are on the front lines saving lives. And so that's one of my concerns, but I understand the balance as well. My second question, if I might, Mr. Chair, is regarding that training. You talked at length about the amount of training that those people have to go through before they ever are actually working for you. Can you talk about that in terms of the dropout rate? What are, if you bring in 10 people that seem to be pretty good candidates and you start them on the training, of those 10, how many actually become, a longtime employee?
Absolutely. I'd love to answer both of those. So I'd like to go back, and I think it's important that people realize that in terms of our full-time employees, you have to remember that our wage is one thing, but our schedule is built into automatic overtime. So it's not truly a straight 40 hours. So because of that, I admitted that it's marginal, but there is a bit of a change there between a normal 36 to 40 hour employee as compared to ours on generally a 42-hour week. So coming back, we've really had very little turnover in that rate. I recently had some people who transitioned to our organization, and they were absolutely thrilled with it. This goes back to the number one question in the patient survey was, we want people to help us improve our clinical skills and tell us how we can do better. That was the most important question to them. It goes back to that development. So us putting this program in place last year helped with that, but these new employees are only reinforcing that for us. They're coming up and telling me that this is absolutely amazing. I had one who told me that he wishes he would have had this for years. He started at one location, and on day one, he was responsible for a patient's life. And though he'd been through school, that's a scary prospect. So we've had no one drop from it yet. In fact, they've been very, very thrilled with it. So it's been a positive. It's well worth its weight in gold.
Well, and I think that's remarkable, and I don't want you to hear my questions as being negative about Paramedics Plus, because I do honor especially when we look at the stats that we're getting in terms of those folks that are providing the service for our people who are in need. But it's valuable also to understand that level of employee that you are bringing in, that they are going, it was making me kind of sick to my stomach listening to your level of training, thinking, oh my gosh, 1 out of 10 must stay, right? No, you're telling me pretty much 10 out of 10. That's remarkable, and I commend you for that, and I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Counselor Staley.
Oh, okay, I've got 3 things here. The first thing is a basic question that just came into my mind. I live alone, so I think about this. If you call 911 and the doors are locked and you're the first people on the scene, do your ambulance employees, are they trained in like kicking down doors? Because I'm assuming the fire department's pretty good at that, but
So that's going to fall to the police department and the fire department. They're a public service. So no, we'll let them know that the door is locked, and hopefully they'll expedite.
But
we will look, but we do
department?
not do forced injury. It's generally against our policy.
so then the police department comes
The
in.
police department, yeah, they would be the appropriate people by law to break into your home, because perhaps somebody called and you weren't there. I mean, that happens sometimes too.
Okay, second thing. I think it's fabulous that you're talking about higher wages. I agree with Councilor Erpenbach on that. I had the opportunity, I had a trip to the emergency room myself last week, and the person doing the ultrasound on my leg happened to be an employee of yours. So she's moonlighting as a Navera employee as well. And then I had another opportunity to talk with another employee of yours. So what they said to me, because I was commending them on the fine job that they're doing, they told me that you've been making an attempt lately to hire more employees. And I'm hearing that, and I'm thinking, that's fabulous. I'm glad that's happening. I don't know if that's something different, that you're doing more staffing. One employee said to me, we're putting more ambulances on the street now. So that I thought was good, but I was like, is this going to be something ongoing that is just happening now? Or so you can fill me in on that. And then the third thing that I needed to say, and I know our city attorney is here, and maybe this is a discussion for tonight, but the contract that you've signed is pretty well sealed up. We're told on the council we really don't have any power to make any changes to this. And I will say that we just went through the contract with our police department and the city employees across the board. We're giving them a 1.5% increase. And I have had citizens who've heard about this 3% built-in guaranteed increase that you're getting, and they're questioning that. So I just wanted to raise that to you, that that's kind of hard to justify giving you 3%, and I understand we certainly want our ambulance employees compensated, but we don't have any authority to do an oversight as to what your expenditures are. Like you just said that you're spending more on that particular materials that you needed. Was it a drug or a?
Correct, ma'am. It's a medication.
Yeah, so that cost has gone up, and great, I understand that, but I'm not allowed to even delve into that whatsoever. So there's no way I can say, yes, they are spending more, no, they're not. So I just want to acknowledge that I understand that we have no authority to not give you the 3%. We're kind of told, I mean, I guess it's just a have to do kind of thing.
You're right, it's part of the contract, and so that would be the answer to that. Is there anything else?
Council.
I think there was. So in terms
the
of
employees, yeah.
in terms of staffing is the one I can recall at this moment. I apologize. So in terms of staffing, as you can see, we saw in November an increase, and then we saw a jump in May. So the concern here is to make sure that we're always adequately staffed and that we can maintain a level of preferably 94, 95% or higher, as we made a promise to you. So in lights of doing that, that means bringing on more staff. And I believe last year I answered Councilor Erickson and she had asked me at the time that this is a growing city. Do you plan to keep up with it? And I think that just demonstrates our desire to keep forward with that. And our ultimate goal is to always be able to maintain at least this level of service, if not better. And the way you do that is by watching these things closely, watching these trends, watching for growth, and then making the appropriate adjustments. I expect this town to grow, and we plan to be here for a very, very long time and to provide excellent service, and we'll need to grow with it.
Councilor Urbanbach, did you have a follow-up question on this?
Just to clarify with Director Franken, would you talk about the length of that contract and who controls, how often is that contract signed and who decides when we go about that and who signs it? What group is in charge of that?
Sure. The original term of the contract is 5 years, and that was signed, that was approved by the City Council at that time when that contract was approved, and then the City Council will regard that again. It'll be brought forward for consideration for an extension, a 6-year extension of that contract at the end of this term, this 5-year term. So the total could potentially be 11 years total of the contract.
But the point is that the City Council is the one that set the terms of that contract.
That's correct.
And that the City Council controls when that contract is up. It controls what the next set of terms is.
Yes, that's correct.
I mean, we can certainly talk about an extension for 6 years, but we can also say, no, we're renegotiating and we'll do this again. And that's up to this group.
That's
correct.
my
That's clarification.
correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Neitzer.
I have 2 questions for Paramedics Plus, but before that,
Sure.
Director Franken, maybe one for you, or I know what the sheriff's policy is, I believe, with Narcan. What is the police department's current policy? Do they carry it? Do they use it?
They just brought a policy to expand their use of Narcan at the last REMSA Medical Board meeting, which was then adopted at the this last REMSA meeting, so that they could actually administer Narcan. And I think I should ask Skip Miller to perhaps share just a couple of words about that.
Yeah, and could you just for the public just elaborate real quickly just what Narcan is used for?
Well, okay, and if that may satisfy then your question, sure. Narcan is a medication that's given for someone who has an overdose of a narcotic. And so, I routinely had to, not routinely, but I did have occasion where, as a nurse in the hospital, where a patient might have gotten too depressed respiratory-wise from a narcotic, you have to administer Narcan. And what that does is it just immediately reverses the narcotic. And so it can take someone from a respiratory depressed state to then they're breathing and they become more alert. And so that's what this is used for. And so now it's considered acceptable to have Narcan available for people. Unfortunately, because of our opioid use and misuse, and then the overdosing that can occur. We're seeing more and more of that in our community, but it's becoming an epidemic across the nation. And so you're seeing Narcan even over the counter as well, people being able to purchase it and have available, like for family members who need to have it on hand for a family member who has an addiction.
So
Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, so my understanding is it's mostly for law enforcement. If they encounter somebody they think may have overdosed, they could use it because in most cases it's not going to be deleterious if they haven't overdosed. Is that? Or
Can you repeat that question?
Well, I mean, the reason law enforcement can administer it, I believe, is that it doesn't necessarily hurt somebody if it's administered usually, even if...
Correct. It has the benefits of it administering Narcan far outweigh anything that's detrimental about Narcan. It does create some challenges, I will say, because someone who has who is overdosed or is having respiratory depression from a narcotic and then comes out of that can be extremely challenging to manage. And so you do have to take care and understand how to have procedures in place after you've administered it.
Okay, and then my next two are for Paramedics Plus, if that's okay. The first is, as far as your customer surveys, so what is the size of the sample? Does everybody get a letter? Is it randomly selected? How does that work?
So that is, in this present form, it is not a letter. So they contact them. And they were averaging, the sample size was approximately 70 to 75 a month. I think it needs to be a larger sample size, but that's what PRC offers as a package. So that would be another consideration why I would continue to look for another vendor. Additionally, was I would like to see a larger sampler size. Normally in EMS, this is starting to become required in RFPs. And we're seeing as an industry discussions of about the range of about 150, kind of 100 being a minimum, 150 being the middle, and 300 being fairly large systems where you might see 900 patients a day per month, because it's really just a matter of getting the people on the phone and then getting someone willing to answer those questions, shortening that list. Because of course with robocalls and other things, people just aren't as willing to take a survey anymore. But it's important information, so we just got to get it.
Okay, very good. And now that we've had the Avera Westside Clinic open for 6 months, maybe a little more than that, so have you, I don't know if you can tell me, have you made transports there? Is that something that you use, or is it only on request? And do you do transport between the Westside Clinic and Avera, Maine, or is that something that they take care of?
So all business within the Avera system within town would be covered under the agreement with the City of Sioux Falls, whether that would be an emergency transfer, so a patient, for example, who may come into the Westside ER and be having a heart attack and needs to go over to the Maine for a cath lab, that would be an emergency priority 2 transport. A majority of what we see there fall into the priority 4 and 5 interfacility transports that were added by them as both hospitals as stakeholders in the RFP process. Under their own response times. And yes, we are held to those response times. And yes, we travel back and forth, but we've always traveled back and forth between both hospital systems in their smaller emergency access, facilities, and then of course other facilities that they may own in town. So this is really nothing new to the business. It was just a slight increase in volume, and then lots of good communication and dialogue with Avera West and my organization to make sure they were getting what they needed, but they understood what the contract requirements were specifically, and how we were going to service them, and how we could best do that would work for all parties, especially the patients.
Okay, and so finally, being way on the west side, for me, if I had an emergency at my home, far closer would be that particular clinic versus Avera, Maine. What would make you determine when you would maybe bring me there?
So we have a destination policy. I don't have it in front of me. I'm not super familiar with it. Unfortunately, I apologize. But we take, it's a freestanding ER. So we take a majority of patients who want to go there. So things that we wouldn't necessarily, off the top of my head, Dr. Luther can kick me if I go out on the wrong road. Would be, for example, we talked about those active stroke patients. So we want to get them to a stroke center so we can get them to a neurologist quickly. We wouldn't want to take STEMI patients there necessarily if we can get them to a STEMI facility and a cath lab quicker. We don't want to take trauma patients that require trauma surgery beds to the Westside ER if we can get them to a trauma surgical bed sooner. So in terms of overall destination policy, that's kind of an easy way to judge it. But it's an ER. It has a physician. There's no reason that you can't go there and be seen by an ER physician. If I was on that side of town and I was having a medical emergency, and that was the closest place, I would happily go there just as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for...
A little slow to the button.
Okay, Councilor Starr.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm not sure who I should gear this towards, but one of the things I want to do since the last time we had a conversation about ambulances that a couple of weeks ago, several of us had the opportunity to visit Metro Communications, and I wanted to make sure that I said thank you for the time, the effort that they did show us to be able to watch the process, have a really good feel for again, gaining more of an in-depth knowledge of how this process works. One of the things that occurred to me after one of the complaint emails that we've gotten in the last couple of weeks about with a patient who had questions about their response time to their call, a person who had fallen off a ladder and had a broken leg. And I know we've we've spent some time, the council's all had a chance to review that process, that because that was a priority 3 call, they were, the ambulance had to be reprioritized to a priority 1 call. And the thing that came to mind for me was we've spent a lot of time talking about mutual aid, and I guess my real question is, why are there penalties and times? And the thing that stood out to me as part of the Metro Communications tour and experience was that we expect Paramedics Plus to continue on to that call even after we've made a request for mutual aid, where we still hold them responsible for the time response as well. And now they're racing to that same location where we've dispatched mutual aid, and where it seems like they should continue to be part of the process, either responding to a priority 3 call. We're at a time where we're at a 980 paging situation, or a level 0, or whatever we're calling it at this time, but it doesn't seem like we're giving the proper incentive to Paramedics Plus, because we're asking them to continue on to a call where there's already been a mutual aid request made. I'm getting a different look. So I'm trying to maybe explain this in the right way. What we expect Paramedics Plus, as part of the contract, to continue on to a priority 1 call once they've cleared an existing call. They're at the hospital. They would go to a priority 1 call even if we've dispatched mutual aid, or Metro Communications has dispatched mutual aid. It seems like we're doubling up on the resources to that 1 call when we're at a time when the system is at a system overload, I guess, if I'm using the right terminology. So maybe Julie can help me a little bit, or understand the thought process of why we would have 2 ambulances headed to the same call when we're at a point when the system is in an overloaded process. I know we've talked about it time and again about, they're still on the clock, even though we've called for mutual aid into that type of call.
Julie Charbonneau, Emergency Medical Quality Assurance Coordinator in the Health Department. Policy says that once mutual aid has been dispatched, that if an in-town ambulance is freed up, it's the dispatcher's job to poll both and see who can be there sooner, and cancel the one who can't be there sooner. So we're not sending 2. Sometimes it has happened. This use of mutual aid is a rare occurrence, and we look at it carefully every time, but that is something that we've identified. We don't want to double up resources. So if the mutual aid ambulance is closer and a Paramedics Plus ambulance frees up, the Paramedics Plus ambulance would take the next call in the queue rather than double up resources. It wasn't always that way because it's such a rare occurrence. We had to kind of work out the bugs, but this seems to be the best way to get care to calls in order of priority. Does that help?
It does, and like I said, because Paramedics Plus is part of the contract, is still responsible for that call and that response time, whether they continue on when the mutual aid unit is called off. And I guess I was trying to understand the penalty part of that as well, because if the mutual aid ambulance continues to the scene, they're still penalized at that point, or when that, based on the time is the way it was explained to us. So wouldn't it make more sense to allow that unit to either continue on or continue into the queue versus pulling them off of a priority 3 call to respond to a priority 1 call when there's already a mutual aid unit in process to the...
Well, if a Paramedics Plus ambulance is en route to a priority 3 call and that's the last resource, and a priority 1 call comes in, they will be diverted to the priority 1 call rather than calling mutual aid, because mutual aid is several miles away and will take some time. If Paramedics Plus units are all on scene and won't have a unit available in a very short period of time, then mutual aid would be called. And then the response time clock and the penalties will be based on when an ambulance gets to the scene. And that would be, as I explained, whoever is going to be able to be there first. We don't want them racing each other to the call, so we want Metro Communications, that fire dispatcher, to control those resources and make those decisions.
Makes sense.
Any other? Councilor Neitzer.
Just to follow up on, based on Councilor Starr's question then, so if Paramedics Plus is well, for any reason we dispatch mutual aid and mutual aid is going to get there first, then Paramedics Plus never arrives, so there is no end time. So is that call just washed?
No,
It's not
actually,
compared?
Paramedics Plus is accountable for that time. So if a mutual aid call happens, a high priority call, and mutual aid is called in from out of town, and it takes them 15 minutes or whatever to get to town, to get to the west side, to get to that call, whatever the case may be, and so there's a penalty, that penalty would be on Paramedics Plus.
So
They're still accountable for the call.
Okay, so the end time is just whenever that mutual aid ambulance shows up, and if it's out of compliance, Paramedics Plus would get fined.
Correct. If we didn't do that, then couldn't an unscrupulous provider, I'm not saying that we have one, say, geez, we're going to be late, call mutual aid.
Sure.
And then we're not accountable. So we hold them accountable for all calls other than those ones that are outside of their control as specified by contract.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, if I can, Julie, if I want to follow up on that a little bit, I'm sorry. Because that's, I guess, where my original thought process was going, was not necessarily that they wouldn't, but the use of mutual aid then is on the other side of that argument, that they're not going to call for mutual aid as quick because they're going to try to free up from maybe finishing out that priority 3 call, whereas and continue the process. So I guess I'm more concerned that maybe we're over-fining or over-regulating that process, that cooperation exists because of the penalty that goes along with it to make sure that you get to that priority 1 call, because the fine for a priority 1 call is significantly more than being late for a priority 3 call.
That's
and then
true.
the dispatching, because once you're pulled off of that call, on the priority 3 call, there's still a 10-minute waiting period before there's mutual aid dispatched to that call. And so
there isn't a 10-minute waiting period. If there's a life-threatening call and an ambulance isn't immediately available, and an ambulance won't be available to go en route in 10 minutes, mutual aid is sent right away. There isn't a 10-minute wait. I think there's been some confusion about that. The 10 minutes is basically because we figure it takes 10 minutes for an out-of-town ambulance to get to town. So if Paramedics Plus can have a unit available to go en route within 10 minutes, we don't send mutual aid. We were sending mutual aid a little more often, and then they were getting turned around, and that's just not a good use of resources. So it's a balancing act. So, and just to clarify, Paramedics Plus does not decide when to call mutual aid. Metro Communications does. Okay.
Makes sense. That's good. I'm good.
Any other comments? Councilor Erickson.
Just to piggyback off of that, and isn't it my understanding that they have no recollection when the mutual aid, I mean, they'll eventually hear about it, but, excuse me, it's not as if I'm driving my ambulance and I get wind that, oh, we need mutual aid, I better hurry it up because the dispatcher is telling me to hurry or I'm going to call mutual aid. There's none of that taking place. It's strictly decided at Metro Communications. Is that correct?
Basically, although Metro Communications does pull units that might be able to be freed to see how soon. So they'll know that
I'm leaving the hospital. Oh, great.
Right.
Okay.
Yes,
You're available.
I can
Here
turn
you go.
around faster at the hospital, skip my cup of coffee or whatever, and be ready for the next call.
Right, and that makes sense. And there's no time starting over, there's none of that as well. It's just once it goes, it's with that call from that time being. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
And the only time, just for total transparency here, the only time when I said that Paramedics Plus doesn't call mutual aid, they have once. And it was an interfacility non-emergency transfer that the system was really busy and a call to move from one hospital to another had waited for a while, and the supervisor at Paramedics Plus asked Metro to call mutual aid as a customer service. So I just wanted to be totally accurate. When I said they don't do it, well, one time. You've seen one, you've seen one.
And
So,
that's non-life-threatening where it's,
correct.
they need a
It
transfer
was someone who's
from-
already at a high level of care, they just needed to be in a different facility.
Correct.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I'm going to stay here because it,
Okay.
all right.
Well, I just have a few comments, and one on the inside of the front cover of this document that we had received. It does show the response time compliance for the priority 1s, priority 2s, and priority 3s. And actually, the priority 3 line almost represents the median, and there's only a deviation of about 2% from that median of 98%. Your contract requires 90%. With the priority 1s, there's 4 different times where we're in compliance 100% of the time. And I compliment you on that achievement. Obviously, we would like to see that 100% of the time. However, we do realize that there's always going to be circumstances that prevent that from happening. Now, what makes this, and I also want to point out, it seems like there's some big dips there, but because we're focusing in, it's just such a small part of the chart there, we're only looking at 4% difference. And so it's really not peaks and valleys. If we had that, enlarge that chart, it would almost look like a straight line going across. And that's, to me, pretty remarkable considering your calls for service. My calculation is your calls for service in just over a year and a half have increased almost 20%. Yet your response times are far above what is required of you in the contract, and I would also say far above what our previous provider actually realized as well. And not to say that they weren't good, because they absolutely were. They too were achieving above the contract requirements. And a lot of the employees are still, that were employed with the previous provider, are still with Paramedics Plus, which illustrates to me, because that's a constant. So you've taken the level of service with a lot of the same individuals and you've raised it even higher. And I think you're to be commended for your efforts in that. And the rationale for a 3% increase, when your calls for service are increasing by 20% and your expenses are increasing, it was $41 to $300 and some. And unfortunately, in the medical profession, we see that across the board. It's not just our ambulance service, but it's throughout the medical industry, and the costs are just simply skyrocketing. And I do know that you are a for-profit organization, and you have to be. Otherwise, you would not be able to provide the service that our citizens require. And you do reinvest in the company here at home. You've illustrated that with your report, with the training that you're providing and with the salary increases that you're providing. So I know this evening we will have the first reading on that discussion, and I'll probably be making a lot of the same points again. But I would just like to thank you for your service. The citizens of Sioux Falls should have the greatest confidence in not only our ambulance provider, but our entire EMS system. And I know we have a lot of individuals in the audience here today, and I thank you for your service. With that, that's the last of our presentations. We do have a report that we have to go back to, fiscal report, or fiscal committee report made by Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for my late arrival to the meeting today, and so I messed up your agenda. But just very briefly, the fiscal committee did meet last week for a brief period of time. We did kind of kick off, in addition to the mayor's budget addresses, we kind of kicked off the city council budget analysis process for the 2018 budget, and we looked pretty much in depth at all of the pieces of the city council budget itself. And the committee then just agreed to move that process into the rest of the city budget. And so that is a new way of looking at the city council budget. We have not pulled it out in a committee situation before, and I appreciated budget analyst Dave Bixler was the one that suggested we do that. And so appreciate that and the ability to take some time to go through that. So that's the report. Thank you.
Councilor Erpenbach, you certainly did not mess up our agenda. If I've learned one thing, it is to be flexible, and I thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
Having said that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for attending.